Barrister Caroline Mbinkar, who is the co-investigator and lead advisor on the Voices from the Cameroon Conflict project, funded by the University of Oxford's Global Challenges Research Fund. Caroline is a distinguished lawyer from Cameroon whose work is known internationally. She co-founded a pro bono law chamber, All for Cameroon, supported by Allen and Overy. The chambers provide free legal assistance for those unable to otherwise afford it. As part of this work, Caroline runs a student law clinic, supervising and training students from around the world, including Cameroon, Belgium, France, Nigeria, the UK, the US, and Zimbabwe. Barrister Mbinkar's role as a barrister and human rights activist has given her glaring exposure to the rapid deterioration of the conflict in her country. She has offered firsthand accounts of deaths at the hands of the military, of children, even of pregnant women. She has demonstrated unrelenting compassion and drive to encourage change. So, Barrister, over to you.
Are you getting me?
We gained your sound,
Yes.
but we lost your video. There you are.
Okay. Are you getting me? Okay. Hi, everyone. I am really honored to be part of this forum. And I have lived the crisis in Cameroon because I was there during the lawyers' protest. And I have spent 4 sleepless years trying to work to see on how this crisis can be resolved. And in the course of trying to do this, as a human rights activist, because I was more concerned with the troubling human rights violations that were going on for these past 4 years, I had to talk to a lot of people, and I discovered that conflicts in Cameroon, or perhaps in Africa, stemming from the right to self-determination, they come about perhaps because people are ignorant. And I decided to do my research on it. I am not going to do a comparative study here, but I am going to talk generally on all the conflicts, both the ones that have been resolved in Africa, the ones that are ongoing, and how to stop or try to stop these conflicts from always coming up. And as I said, in the course of working on the crisis in Cameroon, the one thing I realized is that both the perpetrators, when I talk of the perpetrators, I meant both the governments, the separatists, and even the international community. They seem to have misinterpreted this law. And I decided to go back to look at the right of self-determination. This right of self-determination scares me, but I hear everybody talking about it. And my fear is that people just pick up terms from international instruments and talk about them without fully knowing what they are all about. So I am first going to dwell on the right to self-determination as enshrined in other international instruments. Resolving armed conflicts for self-determination in Africa. The post-colonial era in Africa has been characterized by a surge of armed conflicts for self-determination. While some of these conflicts have been resolved, most of them remain a nightmare. And one is tempted to believe, in the words of Woodrow Wilson, that this principle is loaded with dynamite. To implement this right to self-determination, the UN has been considered both as a foe and a friend to the indigenous people. It is my opinion that to resolve conflicts in Africa, it is important to not only to understand the letter of the law, but to understand the spirit. And in doing this, it is only then that we can resolve those conflicts. When you look at this right to self-determination, it is enshrined in the UN Charter, in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and in the UN Declaration, and even in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And it has simply been defined as the right of the indigenous people to control their lives without unwarranted outside interference. Going by this definition, it is for the indigenous people and not the international or strong actors to determine or discredit it. This principle outlines not only the duty of states to respect and promote the right, but also the obligation to refrain from actions which deprives the indigenous people of the enjoyment of such rights, particularly the use of force to prevent them from exercising these rights. It is therefore the responsibility of all states to ensure that this right is realized. The states are obliged to protect and promote same. From this simple definition, you can understand why the indigenous people, they turn to rely on the UN, like what is happening in Cameroon. It is equally important at this stage to understand the spirit of the law. What did the lawmaker have in mind at the time they were coming out with these instruments governing the rights of the indigenous people? I think the main aim and the essence of all these instruments was to correct all the injustice that were suffered by indigenous people during colonization. And I discovered that the lawmakers at the time had in mind the principle of uti possidetis juris, a Latin expression which stands for as you possess under the law. This principle holds that states created in the wake of colonialism should maintain all boundaries for the sake of stability. It is, however, doubtful whether this principle was intended to be taken literally because it has a lot of limitations and constraints at the implementation stage. And that is what people don't understand. And that is why people at times they blame the UN for not coming in, or at times people are forced to lay complaints in international courts which don't even have jurisdictions. I will therefore go to the constraints and limitations of this right to self-determination. Over the years, this right to self-determination has been a thorny issue for the international community, which has to deal with tension between indigenous people's claim to self-determination and its application under international law. Implementing this right has been complicated because it involves a careful balance of human rights and the state's interest to maintain territorial integration and sovereignty. Further, this principle does not state how the decision is to be made, nor what the outcome should be. It is not clear whether the outcome should be independence, federation, protection, some form of full autonomy or assimilation. It does not state the limitation between people or what constitutes a people. The instruments on this right to self-determination, like most instruments on other rights, have not equally provided sanctions. And that is why states violate them with impunity. That is why most states think that they can use arms, like in Cameroon and like in Biafra, like our doctor said, to oppress or to stop the people from enjoying this right. Another limitation, which is man-made, is the fact that the international governments, institutions, and private agents are intricately connected to the functioning of African states. Examples of this abound. Take the French influence in most of its colonial states. The operation of British companies in Cameroon, to name just a few. Despite these legal constraints, it is good, and it is good for all the actors, all the stakeholders in all the conflicts to understand that it is for the people to determine and not for international actors or the international community to discredit this right. With the definition in mind and having the constraints that comes with the law and those that are man-made, I will then go on to give my own proposals as to how these conflicts can be resolved, but from a general point of view, because I did not talk specifically on Cameroon. The AU, with its own limitation, can play a vital role through mediation. It can play a vital role through mediations and peacemaking operations. It can raise alarms for the international community. But what we've seen on the ground is that the AU has a lot of limitations, like it hasn't the resources to do all this, and that most governments, like the Cameroon government, for example, does not respect decisions from the AU or from the African Commission. An example of this is that this same Southern Cameroon's case had been taken to the African Commission on People and Human Rights, and the African Commission had recommended dialogue. That was sometime in 2009. If the Cameroon had listened to the African Commission and had perhaps called on dialogue, the situation today would have been different. But the Cameroon government stated categorically that they could not negotiate with terrorists. And as the doctor says, it is common to label people who are fighting for these rights or who are fighting for their right to self-determination as terrorists. The second solution, in my opinion, is that a widely shared concern by the international community of the deteriorating law and internal security in areas of conflicts may prepare both governments and leaders of the indigenous people to begin peace negotiations. But what happens in reality? I will go back to the situation in Cameroon. When human rights is being violated in Cameroon with impunity, and the international community stays quiet, the inference is that the international community is giving the leeway for the government to go on and do whatever they want to do. Because in cases of oppression, if you sit on the fence, then you are for the oppressor. Thirdly, the international actors should act multilaterally and place concerted pressure on governments to end violence, whether through trade sanctions, aid, cuts, or otherwise. This is the language that most African countries understand. Most of the governments, they go on violating human rights until when the international community comes in. That is when they begin to, like, perhaps try to, they either perhaps try to clear their names by saying that they are not the aggressors, or they now start to call on negotiation, like what is happening in Cameroon. For 4 good years, people were killed and nothing was being said, nothing was being done. But when there was this call for ceasefire, the Cameroon government called on the separatist leaders for negotiation. This, to me, is like the Cameroon government the Cameroon government, just like any other African government, only listens when they see that the international community is developing some interest in it, or is developing some concern about the progress of the conflicts. At the beginning of mediations, it would be imperative to talk to everyone in order to facilitate true dialogue. Local stakeholders should have control of available negotiating positions. I think at the beginning, if we are going to have a long-lasting solution to conflicts in Africa, especially those arising from the right to self-determination, when mediations commence, it is imperative for everyone to be listened to. Some people should not be neglected. Some people should not be styled as terrorists and not listened to. And like in the case of Cameroon, where there are many groups, it will be necessary to listen to all the groups. And another solution, in my opinion, is that the timely intervention of the UN is of essence. This will save the situation from degenerating into genocide. The UN is bound to come in even at the last stage of conflict resolution. So it will make a great difference if the UN can be involved from the beginning. Believe it or not, when you go to look at all the conflicts in Africa, the ones that have been resolved, the ones that are ongoing, the UN at one point does come in. My question is, why wait until it gets to a degenerating stage before they come in? So I will be proposing that once this conflict starts, the UN should come in and not sit and watch until when it's genocide, when it's getting to the stage of genocide, then we all begin to cry out. Another solution, in my humble opinion, is that diplomatic intervention can go a long way to solve conflicts at the negotiating stage. An example of this is when the US took over mediation between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And one of the speakers said, perhaps it is the duty is the duty of the states to solve their internal problems, or at times the state, or perhaps if I got her well, that perhaps it is not for the UN to intervene, but for the perhaps for the citizens of a particular state to take their destiny into their hands. I believe that when two people are fighting, there is always a need for a third party to come and intervene. And most Africans, after reading the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, they believe so much that the UN is in a better position to solve all conflicts, especially those coming out from coming up as a result of the right to self-determination. The international community can also come in not only to provide humanitarian services, but they can co-opt the aid offices of foreign disasters and work with them and try to see how they can resolve this problem. And the last, I still have two. And one of the solutions that I had in mind was that representatives of nation states and other international agencies should avoid proclaiming whether a given option is non-negotiable. When the international actors already go in to say it is not possible, perhaps to secede, it is not possible to restore a state, they are already they are already saying that some topics are non-negotiable. They are already saying that the disintegration of any state is non-negotiable. And that to me goes contrary to the spirit of the law and to the letter of the law when it comes to the right to self-determination. Lastly, and not the least, great attention should be committed to crimes committed during these conflicts and to violations of human rights. In Cameroon, what happened is that people have, or what is still happening, is that people have resorted to going to the ICC or to the ICJ. If people are to, if people could read and understand the international instruments, they will see the limitations of the ICJ and the ICC in conflict resolution. So in my case, I will propose that those who want to file complaints, especially complaints on human rights violations, should go to the Human Rights Commission and file complaints under the optional protocol 1 and 2 of the ICCPR. With that said, I will conclude by saying that when indigenous people in Africa read through the aforementioned instrument and the UN promptly intervenes in conflicts arising from the right to self-determination, the UN is considered by them as a friend. On the other hand, when the UN, perhaps because of the limitations above, allow the situation to degenerate before it intervenes, it becomes a foe to the international community. Thank you.